The ring leaves her hand at 7 minutes past 9 on a Tuesday morning, and the pawnbroker does not even look up as he slides 4 folded 20s across the glass. Nora Calloway watches the small gold band disappear into a felt tray with 30 other rings, all of them somebody's promise once, and she keeps her face still the way she has taught herself to keep it still through 11 years of mourning she did not want to wake up to. Outside the window, the rain has stopped. The dog is still there. He has been there since before dawn, lying flat against the cold concrete under the awning of her shuttered feed store across the road, ribs showing through a coat that used to be something better, and he is the reason the gold band is gone. She folds the 420s into the front pocket of her work shirt. She does not let herself feel it yet. There will be time for that later, in the dark, when no one is watching. If a story ever made you believe that quiet people carry the heaviest things, stay with this one to the end. It is worth the staying. She had named him nothing. You do not name a thing you cannot keep. For 6 days he had appeared at the edge of her gravel lot at first light, never closer than 30 feet, watching her unlock the laundromat with the same patient stillness a man on watch might use. And for 6 days she had set down a bowl of whatever she could spare and stepped back, and only then would he come and eat. He took the food the way a soldier takes a meal, fast and without joy, as if eating were a duty and not a comfort. When he finished, he would back away to his 30 feet and lie down again and watch the road. Hollis Bend was not a town that had much left over for strays. It had a grain elevator that had stopped turning grain, a diner that opened 4 days a week, a church with a bell that the wind rang more often than the deacon did, and 240 families spread thin across cold farm country where the winters came early and stayed long past their welcome. Nora ran the only laundromat for 19 miles, 8 machines, and a bill she could no longer pay in a cinder-block building her husband had bought the year before the cancer found him. She was 41 years old, and she had buried the only man she ever loved at 30, and she had been keeping a dead man's business alive, out of stubbornness and grief, ever since. The dog changed things, though she could not have said how on that first morning. He was large and lean, a German shepherd, gone hard and watchful in the months he had clearly spent surviving, his coat a classic tan and black saddle, black across the back and shoulders, tan down the legs, a black mask over a long muzzle. One ear stood fully erect, the other carried a small notch near the tip, an old wound, healed, crooked. He wore no collar. Still he moved like a dog that had once worn one, and obeyed it, and meant it. By the 4th morning, Nora had started talking to him. Not commands, just the low-running talk. A person keeps up to fill a silence too big for one. She told him about the machines, about which one ate quarters, and which one shook itself half across the floor on a heavy load. She told him the diner had stopped serving the meatloaf. He would not have wanted anyway. Now, he listened with his head tilted, and he never came closer, and she found that she looked forward to the morning more than she had in a long time. On the 5th morning, the man in the gray overcoat came back. His name was Desmond Fry, and he ran a title loan and repossession office out of a strip unit 40 miles east in the county seat, and he had a way of arriving precisely when a person had run out of room to maneuver. He did not raise his voice. He never did. He stood in her gravel lot in shoes that had never seen gravel before, and he told her in complete and rehearsed sentences that the note on her building was 90 days past due, and that his client had purchased that note from the bank, and that he was a reasonable man who preferred arrangements to unpleasantness. The dog stood up when Fry stepped out of his car. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply rose from his place under the awning across the road and stood square, ears forward, his whole body pointed at the man in the overcoat like a needle finding north. And he stayed that way the entire time Fry spoke. Nora noticed it. She noticed that the dog who would not come within 30 feet of her own outstretched hand had come to his feet, for a stranger he had never seen and had chosen, without hesitation, to dislike him. Fry noticed it too. He kept glancing at the animal. Something in his polished calm thinned at the edges. He finished his sentences faster than he had started them, left a card pinned under her windshield wiper, and drove back the way he had come, and the dog watched the car until it was gone past the elevator and out of sight, and only then lay back down. That night, Nora could not pay the card any mind. She sat at her kitchen table with a shoebox of paper that told her what she already knew. 11,000 and some dollars on the building. 2 months behind on her own rent. A truck with a transmission that slipped in the cold, and in the bottom of the box, wrapped in a square of blue cloth, her husband's watch and her own wedding ring, the last 2 things in the world she had sworn she would never sell. She did not sleep. She got up before light and went out to the lot with a can of the cheap stew she kept for herself, and found the dog lying flat and shivering under the awning. And when she set the bowl down, he did not get up. He lifted his head. He looked at her. And for the first time in 6 days, he did not eat. That was what decided her. Not the note, not Fry, not the cold. A dog that would not eat was a dog that was giving up. And Nora Calloway had spent 11 years refusing to give up on things everyone told her were already lost. She drove 40 minutes to the pawn shop in the county seat with her husband's watch and her own ring wrapped in the blue cloth on the seat beside her, and she sold the ring because the watch was Tom's and the ring was only hers to give. And she bought a sack of real food and a course of dewormer and a flea treatment and a soft, wide collar the color of dark leather, and she drove home with $80 and the rest in supplies, and an emptiness on her left hand she did not look at. He ate that evening, slowly at first. Then, with something close to need, she sat on an overturned milk crate 10 feet away and watched him eat the good food, and she felt for the first time in longer than she could measure that she had done one clean and useful thing in a life that had felt like nothing but holding back a tide. When he finished, he did not back away to his 30 feet. He took 2 steps toward her and lay down, closer than he had ever come, and put his head on his paws and watched her with dark almond eyes. And Nora understood that something between them had been decided that she had not decided alone. She named him, then. She called him Scout, because he watched the road, and because the name felt true in her mouth. For 9 days, Scout was hers. He filled out across the ribs. The dullness left his coat. He learned the rhythm of the laundromat and lay in the warm patch by the dryers while the machines turned, and he walked the fence line of her lot twice each evening, like a sentry making rounds, and he came to her hand now when she offered it, though he never lost the watchfulness, never stopped angling himself between her and any car that pulled off the county road. When Fry's gray sedan came back on the 7th of those days, Scout was on his feet before the wheels left the asphalt, planted in the gravel, silent and immovable, and Fry conducted his second conversation from the far side of his own car door and cut it short. Nora began to think she might keep him. She began, dangerously, to hope. Then, on the 10th morning, a truck she did not recognize slowed on the county road, and a man got out, and the dog who answered to Scout came up off the warm concrete like a shot and ran flat out across the gravel, making a sound she had never heard him make, a high, broken sound that was half a bark and half a thing with no name. And he hit the stranger chest high, and the man went down on one knee in the road with both arms around a dog's neck, and Nora stood in her doorway with a coffee cup going cold in her hand and watched a dog she had paid for with her wedding ring choose another person entirely. The man was a Marine. She knew it before he stood the way you know weather. He wore a woodland, marpet camouflage uniform, gone soft and pale with washing, sleeves rolled to the forearm, scuffed brown combat boots, dog tags on a beaded chain, and he held the dog's head in both hands and pressed his forehead against the black mask, and his shoulders shook once, hard, and went still. When he got to his feet, he was tall, broad through the shoulders, his hair a dark, high and tight, going gray at the temples, 3 days of beard on a hard-set jaw, and his eyes, when they found Nora, were a pale wolf gray, and rimmed red, and full of something she had no word for, that was grief and disbelief, and a terrible, careful hope all at once. "His name is Ranger," the Marine said. His voice came out rough. "I have been looking for him for 14 months. His name was Gunnery Sergeant Wyatt Lansing, and the dog she had called Scout had spent 4 deployments at the end of his lead." They sat in the diner because the diner was warm and because Nora did not know what else to do with the morning that had broken open in her gravel lot. Pro Mabry, who had run the diner's counter for 30 years and missed nothing that happened in Hollis Bend, set coffee in front of both of them without being asked and went back to wiping a clean spot on the counter so she could keep watching. The dog lay under the table with his head on the Marine's boot and one paw stretched to touch Nora's, as if he had not yet worked out that he was being asked to belong to 2 people, and did not see why he should have to choose. Wyatt told it plainly, the way a man like him tells anything, in short, flat sentences that cost him to say. He and Ranger had come home from the last deployment 15 months back. The dog had been due to retire to him, the paperwork all but signed a formality. Then there had been a transport, a crate, a contractor handling the kennel logistics between the base and the veterinary hold, and somewhere in 300 miles of interstate, the dog had gone missing from a service plaza in weather like this. The contractor had filed a form and collected a fee and moved on. And the Army had listed Ranger as lost in transit, and Wyatt had spent 14 months, and most of what he had, driving a grid of county roads, with a stack of flyers and a photograph and a description nobody recognized. "I almost stopped in this town twice," he said. "Drove the bypass instead. Saved myself the 40 minutes. He looked down at the dog under the table. 40 minutes he wouldn't eat, Nora said. The morning before I found him food. He just looked at me and wouldn't eat. She did not say what she had paid. She had decided, somewhere between the gravel lot and the diner booth, that she would never say it. I think he was about done. He doesn't quit, Wyatt said. I have seen that dog work a fence line for 9 hours with no water and not quit. He turned the coffee cup a quarter turn and did not drink it. If he was about done, it is because he had decided there was nothing left to wait for. Then he looked at her, and his pale eyes moved over her, like a man reading terrain. And then you fed him, and he started waiting again. That answer stayed in Nora's head longer than she expected. Pearl came over then with the pot and refilled cups that did not need it, and she looked at the dog under the table and at the worn uniform, and she said, in the flat way of a woman who had buried 2 husbands and a son, and earned the right to say hard things gently, "You'll be wanting to take him home, then." The whole booth went quiet. Wyatt did not answer right away. He looked at Nora, and Nora looked at the table, and under the table the dog lifted his head and laid it deliberately across both their feet at once, his and hers, and would not be moved. "I drove 14 months to find him," Wyatt said at last. "I am not in a hurry to do anything in the next hour." And he let it sit there, and Nora was grateful to him for it in a way she could not have explained, because the truth she had not let herself look at since the gravel lot was that she did not know how she would walk back into that quiet building if the dog walked out of it. She had sold the last of her marriage to keep him alive. She had not understood until the truck slowed on the county road how much she had needed something to keep alive. They might have gone on like that, careful and circling, except that the bell over the diner door rang and Desmond Fry walked in out of the cold. He had not come for Nora. He had come, it turned out, for Pearl, because Pearl Mabry's diner sat on a lot whose note Fry's client had also bought, and he had a folder of papers and a reasonable arrangement and a way of speaking that filled a room with the temperature of a bank vault. He set his folder on the counter, and he began to explain to Pearl in complete sentences the unpleasantness she could avoid. And the dog came out from under the table without a sound and put himself in the aisle between Fry and the old woman, and stood there, square and silent, ears forward, every muscle in him pointed at the man in the gray overcoat. Fry stopped talking. "Call off the dog," he said. "He's not mine to call," Nora said. Wyatt had not moved from the booth, but he had turned, and his pale gray eyes were on Fry now, with the flat attention of a man who has spent his life deciding very quickly whether a thing in front of him is a threat. "He doesn't take to everybody," Wyatt said quietly. "Took him about a year to take to me. Makes a man wonder what he smells." The room held its breath. Fry gathered his folder. He told Pearl he would return when the company she kept was more conducive to business, and he left, and the dog watched the gray sedan out of the lot, the way he watched all of Fry's leavings, all the way to the elevator and gone, and only then came back and lay down across two pairs of feet. It was Pearl who said it after refilling the coffee one more time. "That man has papered half this county into the ground," she said. "He bought my note in March. He bought yours in April. He bought the Hadley place and the old creamery and the Sorensen farm, and every one of us got the same folder and the same speech. And not one of us can afford a lawyer to read the fine print he's so fond of." She set the pot down hard. "He doesn't break a single law. That's the worst of it. He just knows which of us is too tired to fight." Wyatt said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked to see the folder Fry had left, and Pearl gave it to him, and he read it the way he read everything. Slowly, twice, his lips moving slightly over the dense paragraphs, and when he finished, he set it down and said he's counting on nobody reading past the first page. "Can you read past the first page?" Pearl asked. "No," Wyatt said, "but I know how to find a man who can, and I have got 14 months of nowhere to be." He looked at the dog and at Nora, and something in the set of his jaw shifted, the way a man's face shifts when a long, aimless grief finally finds a direction to point. "And it appears I am staying in this town a few days regardless." He took a room at the one motel. Hollis Bend still had a 6-unit strip behind the elevator with a flickering sign, and he did not take the dog with him. He left Ranger at the laundromat with Nora the first night and every night after, and when she protested, he said only that the dog had decided where he slept, and he had learned a long time ago not to argue with that dog about a decision he had made. So Ranger lay by the dryers in the warm patch and walked the fence twice each evening, and Nora kept telling herself this was temporary, that the Marine would heal whatever he had come to heal and load his dog into that truck and drive away. And she went on believing it less every day. Wyatt came by each morning. He fixed the dryer that shook itself across the floor because his hands needed something to do, and because a man raised the way he had been raised could not sit in a building that was broken and leave it broken. He found the slipping transmission in her truck and spent 2 cold afternoons under it with Ranger lying in the gravel beside his boots, and when he was done, the truck held its gear in the cold, and he would not take $1 for it. He learned the names of her 8 machines and which one ate quarters. He was a quiet presence in the corner of her days, and the building that had been too big for one was, she noticed, exactly large enough for 2 people and a dog who could not decide between them. He told her in pieces across those days what 14 months on the road does to a man. He told her about the flyers and the shelters that did not have him, and the false sightings that drove him 200 miles to look at someone else's dog. He told her once, late, with the machines turning and the snow coming down past the window glass, about the kennel where he and Ranger had trained, and the handlers who became the only family a deployment leaves a man, and how the dog at the end of the lead had been the one steady thing in a decade of unsteady ground. People think the dog is the weapon, he said. The dog is the thing that reminds you you're still a person. You come back from a place that takes the person out of you, and the dog still looks at you like you're worth coming home to. That's the whole of it. Nora told him things, too, in pieces. About Tom and the cinder block building bought with such hope, and the cancer that took 8 months to do what it came to do, and the 11 years she had spent keeping a dead man's business open, because closing it felt like burying him a second time. She did not tell him about the ring. She did tell him one night that she had not bought anything for herself in 3 years and had stopped noticing, and Wyatt looked at her bare left hand, and then at her face, and did not say anything, but his pale gray eyes went careful, and she had the sense of a man filing something away. Then the notice came. It came on a Thursday, taped to the laundromat door in a clear plastic sleeve, a single page that said the note holder had elected to accelerate the balance and that the property would be sold at a public foreclosure auction on the courthouse steps in the county seat in 21 days, and that any personal property remaining on the premises after the sale date would be deemed abandoned. Fry had not even come himself. He had sent it by certified mail, and a man on a motorcycle had taped it to the door, and the cold efficiency of it, the way a building Tom had bought with 11 years of her life could be erased by a single taped page, hit Nora harder than any of Fry's polished speeches ever had. She did not cry in front of Wyatt. She waited until he had gone back to the motel and the dog was lying in the warm patch and the machines were off. And then she sat on the floor with her back against the cold cinder block and put her face in her hands, and Ranger got up from his warm patch and crossed the room and lay down against her side, pressing his whole warm weight along her, his head in her lap, and stayed there while she came apart in the dark and put herself back together. He did not understand the page on the door. He understood the woman on the floor. That was enough. In the morning, Wyatt read the notice through the plastic sleeve twice, and his jaw set, and he said 21 days. Then he got in his truck and drove 40 miles to the county seat, and did not come back until after dark, and when he came back he had a name and a phone number and a flat cardboard box. Whilst the name belonged to a woman who had retired from the county recorder's office, an old woman named Estelle Hartley, who had spent 31 years filing deeds and liens and knew every paper trick a man like Fry could pull because she had watched men like Fry pull them for 3 decades. The cardboard box held copies, page after page, of the recorded assignments by which Fry's client had acquired the notes on half of Hollis Bend, because every one of those assignments was a public document, And Estelle Hartley had taught Wyatt, over a kitchen table and a pot of coffee, exactly how to walk into the recorder's office and ask for them. It took 11 days. Wyatt and Nora and Pearl, Mabry and a retired recorder, spread the documents across the diner tables on the days the diner was closed, and Estelle read them with a magnifying glass and a pencil, and slowly, the way water finds a crack, the shape of what Fry had done came clear. He had not broken a law, Estelle confirmed that early, and grimly he had, though, been sloppy, in the way that confident men are sloppy when they believe no one too tired to fight will ever check their work. On 6 of the notes he had acquired, including Nora's and Pearl's, the assignments had been recorded out of order. The note transferred before, the entity that transferred it legally held it, a gap of as little as 9 days, but a gap. The chain of title was broken. Fry's client did not, on the day they had elected to accelerate Nora's balance, cleanly hold the right to accelerate it. It does not erase the debt, Estelle said, tapping the page. She was 80, if she was a day, sharp as a tack, dressed in a heavy coat and a knit cap. She did not take off indoors because the diner could only afford to heat half itself. You will still owe the money. He cannot, however, take the building on this paper, not at this auction, not on this timeline. A judge will not allow a foreclosure on a broken chain. He will have to start over, refile, renotice, wait the statutory period, months. And men like Desmond Fry do not like to wait months. They have too many other tired people to visit. Why hasn't anyone caught this before? Nora asked. Because nobody read past the first page, Estelle said, and looked at Wyatt and almost smiled, until somebody with nowhere to be and a stubborn dog walked into my recorder's office. Fry, though, had not built what he built by being a man who lost gracefully, and competence, even sloppy competence, defends itself. 2 days before the auction, Estelle Hartley called Nora's laundromat in the early dark, and her sharp old voice was tight. The recorder's office had been visited. A clerk Fry knew had pulled the 6 original assignment documents to make corrections, re-recording them in the proper order with backdated cover sheets, and if the corrected versions were the ones that reached the judge, the broken chain would be mended on paper, and the auction would proceed, and Nora would lose the building in 40 hours. Did he get them all? Wyatt asked. He had come the moment Nora called him, the dog already in the truck, the cold coming off both of them in the doorway. He pulled the originals, Estelle said over the phone, loud enough for the room. But the originals are not the only copies. I made certified copies of all 6 the day we found the gap, date-stamped, in a sealed envelope. I am not a fool, Sergeant. I filed deeds for 31 years next to men who would steal the gold out of your teeth. I keep copies of everything. Where are they? A pause. In my house on Sorensen Road. And I am 81 years old, and there is a man in a gray overcoat who knows I am the one who found his mistake, and I do not mind telling you I locked my doors tonight for the first time in 40 years. Wyatt was already moving. Stay inside. Lock everything. We're coming to you. They drove the dark county roads to Sorensen Road with the snow coming down through the headlights and the dog standing braced on the seat between them. And when they came over the last rise, Nora saw a gray sedan parked at the foot of Estelle Hartley's drive with its lights off, and a man in a gray overcoat standing on the old woman's porch with his hand raised to her door. He was not breaking in. He never broke a law. He was knocking politely at 9 at night on the door of an 81-year-old woman who lived alone, and he had a folder under his arm and an arrangement on his lips, and he meant to stand on that porch in the cold and be reasonable at her until a tired old woman handed over a sealed envelope to make the unpleasantness stop. Wyatt stopped the truck across the foot of the drive, blocking the sedan, and got out, and the dog came out with him without a command, low and silent across the snow, and put himself at the base of the porch steps, between Desmond Fry and the truck, ears forward, the whole length of him pointed up at the man on the porch. He did not bark. He did not bare a tooth. He simply stood, square and immovable, 100 pounds of certainty in the falling snow, and looked at Desmond Fry with dark almond eyes that did not blink. Fry came down off the porch slow. "You are interfering," he said, "with a lawful business call. It's 9 at night," Wyatt said. He had not raised his voice. He stood at the foot of the steps in his pale-washed camouflage, with the snow gathering on his shoulders and his pale gray eyes flat and steady. And Nora, getting out of the truck behind him, understood for the first time the kind of stillness this man had carried home from wherever he had been. "You drove 40 miles in the snow to knock on an old woman's door in the dark. That's not a business call. We both know what that is." "I have not threatened anyone," Fry said. "I have not laid a hand on a soul." "You cannot prove a single unlawful act." "No," Wyatt agreed. "I can't, but she can." And he nodded up at the porch where the door had opened, and Estelle Hartley stood in the warm light of her own front hall in her heavy coat and her knit cap, and in her hand, held up where the headlights caught it, was a phone, the small screen glowing, the red dot of a recording app burning in the corner. "She's been filming since your tires hit her road. A man in a gray overcoat on an old woman's porch at 9 at night, the night before a foreclosure she's a witness to. You haven't broken a law, Fry. But that picture is going to a judge tomorrow, along with 6 certified copies and a sworn statement. And you are going to spend the next year explaining to a courtroom why you were standing here. You're a careful man. Think about how that looks." For a long moment, nothing moved but the snow. Then Desmond Fry did the thing that men like Desmond Fry always do in the end, which is calculate. Nora watched it happen behind his eyes, the cold arithmetic of a man weighing what a thing would cost him. And she watched him arrive at the only sum that made sense to a man who had never once in his life valued anything. He could not put a number on. He smiled, the thin, practiced smile, and he said that there had clearly been a misunderstanding, and that he was a reasonable man, and that upon reflection his client might prefer to release the 6 contested notes back to the bank rather than pursue an auction encumbered by such an unfortunate procedural cloud. He said it all in complete sentences. He gathered his folder. He got into his gray sedan, and Wyatt moved the truck to let him pass, and the dog watched the sedan all the way down Sorensen Road and out of sight. And only then did the dog come back through the snow and climb the porch steps and lean his whole warm weight against the legs of Estelle Hartley, who put one liver-spotted hand on his head and let out a long breath she seemed to have been holding for 31 years. Fry did not face a judge. Men like Fry rarely do. He withdrew, way water withdraws, and turned up somewhere 2 counties over with a new strip mall office and the same folder and the same speech, because the system that made him was larger than any one porch in the snow. Still, the 6 notes went back to the bank, and the bank, embarrassed and wanting no part of a recorded scandal, restructured all 6 on plain terms a tired person could actually meet, and the auction on the courthouse steps was canceled, and the taped page came down off the laundromat door, and Hollis Bend kept for a while longer. The diner, and the laundromat, and the Hadley place, and the creamery, and the Sorensen farm, and the old woman who had filed deeds for 31 years, and kept copies of everything. It should have been the end. There was still, though, the matter of the dog and the man and the woman and the thing. None of the 3 of them had been willing to say out loud. The morning after the snow on Sorensen Road, Wyatt came to the laundromat early, before the machines with the dog already at his heel, and Nora knew the moment she saw his truck loaded that he had come to do the hardest thing he had left to do. He stood in the gravel lot where the dog had first appeared in the gray overcoat-colored dawn, and he said he had a place lined up 400 miles south, a few acres and a fence, where a retired working dog could finally just be a dog, and that the paperwork was done at last and Ranger was his, fully and finally his. The way it should have been 15 months ago, he said it all without once looking at her bare left hand, and then he ran out of things to say, and they stood there in the cold with the dog between them. "He's yours," Nora said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I always knew that from the morning that truck slowed down. I knew that." She crouched and put her hand on the black mask of the dog she had called Scout and paid for with her marriage, and the dog leaned into her hand, and she made herself smile. "He waited 14 months for you. I just kept him fed for a few weeks. That's not the same as keeping him." "No," Wyatt said. "It isn't." He was quiet a moment, then he said, "Pearl told me what you did the morning he wouldn't eat." "She didn't mean to," Wyatt said. "It came out sideways, the way things do with Pearl, about a ring." He looked at her bare left hand, now openly, for the first time, and his pale gray eyes were not careful anymore. They were something else. "You sold your wedding ring to buy food. For a stray, you couldn't keep a dog that wasn't yours, that you had no reason to think would ever be yours, that backed off 30 feet every time you fed it." His voice was rough again, the way it had been the morning the truck slowed. "You want to tell me why a person does that?" "Because he wouldn't eat," Nora said. "Ta. Because I have spent 11 years not able to save the one thing I wanted to save, and there was a living thing in my gravel lot that I could still feed. So I fed it." She stood up. Her hand stayed on the dog's head. "It wasn't about him being mine. It was about him being alive." Wyatt was quiet for a long time. The snow had stopped. Somewhere past the elevator, the church bell moved in the wind. The dog looked from one of them to the other and lay down across both their boots, the way he had in the diner, the way he had on Sorensen Road, refusing the choice. "I have a fence and a few acres 400 miles south," Wyatt said finally, "and the only thing on it is going to be a dog and a man who spent 14 months learning he is not very good at being alone." He turned the words over slow. A man unused to saying the thing under the thing. "It is a long drive. It is a quiet place. A dog like this does better. With land and work and people who don't quit." He looked at her. "I have only ever met one person who would sell her own wedding ring to feed a dog that wasn't hers. I am not in a hurry to drive away from her in the next hour, or it turns out at all." Nora Calloway looked at the man in the washed pale uniform and the dog across their boots and the cinder-block building behind her that she had kept alive out of grief for 11 years, and she felt the grief shift inside her, not vanish. Grief does not vanish, but turn, the way the dog had turned her toward the morning, the way a thing that has only ever pointed backward finally finds a direction. "I can't leave the laundromat," she said. It came out, though, like a question. "I'm handy," Wyatt said. "I fixed your dryer and your transmission in a week. Reckon I could run 8 machines. The corner of his hard mouth moved the closest thing to a smile she had seen on him. "Or you could keep this one, and we could figure the rest. I'm not in a hurry about that either. I've learned the only things worth having are the ones you don't quit on." They did not decide it all that morning in the gravel lot. People like Nora and Wyatt do not decide large things quickly, and they had earned the right to take their time. Wyatt did not, however, drive 400 miles south that day or the next. He fixed the church bell so the wind rang it true. He helped Pearl repaper her diner lot on the bank's plain terms. The dog walked the fence line of the laundromat twice each evening like a sentry making rounds, and slept in the warm patch by the dryers, and stopped at last trying to choose between two people because he had worked out at some point in the snow that he did not have to. The ring did not come back. Nora drove to the pawn shop in the county seat one cold afternoon alone to see if it was still in the felt tray, and it was gone, sold on to someone else's hand, somebody else's promise now. She stood at the glass case a long moment. Then she drove home, and she found she did not mind as much as she had thought she would. The ring had been a promise she had kept for 11 years to a man who was gone. She had traded it for a living thing that would not eat, and the living thing had brought her a man who would not quit, and somewhere in that trade, a dead 11 years old had quietly come paid in full. On the first warm evening of the spring, when the snow had finally pulled back off the farm country, and the elevator stood gold in the long light, Nora sat on the steps of the cinder-block building Tom had bought. With such hope, and the dog lay in the gravel of the lot where he had first appeared, a starving stranger 30 feet from her hand. Fat, now, and easy, his coat gone bright, his notched ear up, watching the empty county road, the way he always watched it, out of old habit, out of love, out of a working dog's certainty that watching is what you do for the people who would not quit on you. A truck came down the road and did not slow, and the dog did not rise. He only lifted his head and watched it go, and laid his head back down. There was nothing on the road worth getting up for. Everything worth watching was already here. Nora looked at her bare left hand resting open on her knee, and then at the man beside her, and then at the dog she had paid for with the last of one life and been given the whole of another in return. If you have ever wondered whether a small kindness in a hard season is wasted, whether feeding the hungry thing in your own cold lot when you cannot even feed yourself is foolishness, hold this close. She did not know, the morning she set down that ring, that the dog belonged to anyone. She did not feed him to be repaid. She fed him because he was alive and hungry, and she still had one thing left to give, and she gave it, and that is the only kind of goodness that has ever changed anything. The world is full of men in gray overcoats who know which of us is too tired to fight. It is held together by the tired ones who feed the stray anyway. May God keep your hand open in the hard seasons. May He send something living across your own cold lot to remind you that you are not done, and someone who will not quit on you when you have forgotten how to ask. And when a truck comes down your road that does not slow, may you find, like this woman did, that everything worth watching for is already home. The dog watched the road, the man watched the woman. And the woman, for the first time in 11 years, watched the spring come on, and did not flinch from it. Finally, home.